It was Halloween night 2016. I was tasked by my parents to hand out candies to all the kids. For the day, my mom bought 1,000,000 bags of candy that I knew we'd have left over for weeks, and I'd be the one regrettably munching on them for days, if not weeks to come, as I was trying to lose weight. I always told my mom she went way overboard with the candies. The house was in a cul-de-sac on a dead end, so we hardly got any trick-or-treaters usually. However, we did have some loyal kids who'd always come to our house, knowing how much candy we'd give. Halloween was on a Monday this year. Though I was in college, and I conveniently had Mondays and Wednesdays off this semester, so the first half of the day I went to the gym and then worked on my assignments for class. It was always around 4 p.m. that the sound of kids outside would indicate that trick-or-treaters were out. The first time the doorbell rang was, I guess, somewhere between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. The day went as you'd expect. There's nothing interesting about handing out candies all day to little kids, and my dog Vito barking like crazy every time the doorbell rang. I'd say from the first trick-or-treater to 8 p.m., there were maybe 10 to 15 total. As I said, that cul-de-sac was out of the way for people to come. It was more effective for trick-or-treaters to pass it and just keep going straight. It being a Monday night, things quieted down much earlier than usual. I'd say I got enough homework done. I put a dent in my projects, and so I had some of my mom's leftover stew and went to my room to watch Game of Thrones. I was literally 2 episodes in when I heard the unexpected sound of the doorbell. Vito started barking again. I looked at the clock, and it had to be like 9:30. This was definitely beyond the cutoff time for trick-or-treaters. I went downstairs to the front door and opened it. On the other side of the glass storm door was a very tall man in a clown costume with a very scary-looking mask. I knew it was a man just based on the frame of the person. He was alone. He waved at me and then pointed at the brown sack he was holding. It looked basically empty. I didn't open the storm door. I just said through it, "Sorry, we don't have any more candy," and slammed the door shut. I locked it right away. I instantly regretted opening the door. I genuinely thought it was just some kid or an unfortunate mother or father who worked late and wanted to get some last-minute trick or treating in with their kids. Whoever I just saw on our stoop was not a kid. Hell, it didn't even look like a teenager. The frame of this person was massive, and the clown costume just made him look even bigger. Thankfully, I didn't grab the candy bag before opening the door, so he couldn't see that I was lying. He hovered by the door for a bit just to listen and see if I'd hear footsteps walking away, but not only did I not hear him walk away, he rang the doorbell again. Vito once again started going ballistic. Vito's a rat terrier. His bark is not intimidating, nor would he ever actually defend the home from an intruder. I picked him up and carried him upstairs after turning off the lights downstairs. This was my half-assed attempt at getting him to think I was absolutely never opening that door again tonight. I put Vito in my room and shut the door so he wouldn't keep barking. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening, and then I heard through the front door the storm door being forced open, like there was a loud snap implying that the latch may have been broken from force. I then heard both knocks on the front door and then the doorknob moving around. At this point, I decided to hide in my room. I was incredibly unsettled. I texted my family group chat about what was going on. No one answered, though, of course. I knew that whoever that was had to get bored eventually. I would have texted all my guy friends asking who it was, but all my guy friends assured. I resumed the episode I was watching. I was truly just trying to pretend he wasn't there. What else was I to do? The doorbell rang once again, though. This was a nightmare. I kept telling Vito to shush. I had my blinds closed too. I didn't want that fucking clown knowing what room I was in. I tried calling my dad, but he didn't pick up. I called my brother, who picked up saying he wasn't alone, and I knew that meant he was with a girl. I told him to check my texts. There's some guy dressed as a clown at the door, and he won't go away. My brother said it's a Halloween prank, and to just ignore it. He seemed like he was in a hurry to get off the phone, so I hung up. I hoped he was right. It honestly made the most sense to be a prank. So after a few more minutes of sitting on the edge of my bed, anxious, the doorbell did not ring again. I finally felt safe to relax again and lay back down. I started drifting away slowly, so I turned off the TV to allow complete silence and darkness in the room. And very shortly after that, I drifted to sleep. I don't even think I was asleep long enough to enter REM state and have a dream when I woke up at Vito growling and quietly barking as he would do when he was waiting for approval from one of us. I told him to be quiet, and he stopped. I looked to see what he was looking at. He was looking at the window. I listened. There was a sound coming from right outside the window, the slightest thumping sounds, and I could almost swear the sound of something rubbing on the window. My bedroom was on the second floor of the house. It's not like anyone could be outside my window. But I wondered what it was. I got up and pushed open the blinds on my window, and boy was I wrong. That man dressed as a clown was at my window. All I could see was that horrific mask on the other side of the glass. He tilted his head as he looked at me. Screaming my lungs out, Vito D didn't even bark from what I remember, or maybe I just blocked everything else out. I ran with my phone out of my room and to my parents' bedroom, where I locked the door and dialed 911. I was too shook to even cry. My whole body was shaking, and my voice was trembling as I spoke to the 911 operator. I must have asked the operator once every 20 seconds to get the police to hurry up. She told me the same thing every time: they're coming as fast as they can. The police got to the house in roughly 10 minutes. They examined the exterior of the house to look for any attempted entry points. All they found was that the latch on the front storm door was broken, like I figured, and leaned against the side of the house by my bedroom window was my dad's ladder. That man went into our storage shed outside and found my dad's ladder to use to climb up to my window. To avoid this going any further, I went to go sleep at my guy friend Adam's house. To this day, I don't know if this was just a sick prank purposely played on Halloween, or if there was about to be a horrible crime committed with the sick novelty of it being Halloween. I work for a catering service, which means I'm on the road a lot, usually late at night. I spend most of my time lugging stuff from place to place in this massive truck the company makes me drive. It's not the worst job in the world, but the hours suck, and it's not at all what I thought I'd be doing with my life. By the time I get home, I'm either so wired from caffeine that I can't sleep, or I pass out the second I hit the bed and stay that way for 12 hours. I was driving back home one night at like 2 a.m. It was nice to be driving my own car again. As I was approaching my house, I realized I had probably had one too many Red Bulls, and there was no way I'd be able to sleep. On top of that, I hadn't eaten in hours and I was starving. There's a McDonald's right off the highway, about 10 minutes from my house. It's usually my first choice when it comes to late night snacks since it's just so convenient. I'm not even one to gorge myself on fast food. I just occasionally get this weird craving that only a handful of fries can satisfy. It's obviously open 24/7, and I figured some comfort food would be the perfect thing to help me wind down. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was definitely after 2 by the time I pulled into the drive-thru. There were a few cars ahead of me, which I was actually kind of surprised by. It's not like this McDonald's was a busy spot at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. As I was sitting there impatiently, I found myself staring off into space, wondering what was taking so long. That's when I noticed something strange. There was an old, beat-up Volkswagen with its windows tinted, backed into a spot in the very corner of the lot. The McDonald's itself was only accepting drive-through orders at this hour, so it didn't make sense for there to be a car in the lot. There were reserved spots on the other side for employees, so it couldn't have been one of them. I figured it was maybe just someone eating in their car, which it probably was. I myself did that from time to time, so I guess I couldn't judge. It was just an odd sight, to be completely honest. I got my food and started driving away. I didn't want to go home just yet, but I also didn't want to just sit there idling my car. I began racking my brain, trying to think of a good place to scarf down the food. I live in a pretty lush area, so there's honestly a lot of options, but I didn't want to beat around the bush too much considering how late it was. There's a massive nature preserve literally down the street from my house. It's situated on a mountain and is essentially just an enormous forest. The kicker is that there's a scenic lookout point at the peak with a view of the city. There's a road that loops around the perimeter of the preserve and will take you right to the peak, which is nice during the day. After the preserve closes, though, the road is inaccessible to cars, but still a convenient path to get to the peak without having to walk through any woods. I used to go there with my friends from high school all the time. It was kind of a default spot when we wanted to be outside. We'd hang out, talk, smoke, or just appreciate the view. I actually hadn't been there in a while because I was just so busy working all the time, so I figured going there would deliver a much-needed nostalgia rush. When I got to the preserve parking area, it was completely empty. I say parking area because it wasn't a traditional parking lot with spaces for cars, but rather a big patch of gravel that veered off from one of the roads that ran past the preserve border. Like I said, the actual preserve was closed, meaning I'd have to walk all the way up to the lookout spot. Before I could even turn off the engine, I saw headlights pulling into the lot. That was unsettling enough on its own. Who else would be here at 2 a.m.? And then I realized what I was looking at. It was that same Volkswagen from the McDonald's parking lot. I was 100% certain of it. I parked a little ways away, and the engine cut off. I felt the unease start to pour in. What were the odds of that happening? Naturally, I thought they had followed me. My window was partially rolled down, and as far as I could tell, there was no music coming from that car, or at least none that I could hear. After nothing happened for a good minute or so, my fear started to fade. They were probably doing the same thing. I was out for some fresh air or smoke. It's a pretty popular spot for that kind of thing. But I was just so weirded out considering how late it was. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even though I concluded that it was just one of those unexplainable coincidences. I sat there for a minute, debating if I should just go home. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to be alone either. I picked up my phone and FaceTimed one of my close friends who lived a few minutes away. I told myself that if he didn't pick up, I'd just eat my food in the car and drive home. He was actually awake though, which I was a little surprised by. He said he had been up writing a paper, and I convinced him to swing by and hang out for a bit. He was down. He said he'd be there in 10 minutes. While I waited, I kept my eyes on the Volkswagen. It still hadn't moved. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. When Sebastian finally pulled into the lot, I felt a lot better. We both got out of our cars and began walking up the path. Before the parking lot fully receded from view, I shot a glance backward. The Volkswagen was still there, but I saw all 4 doors open at once. 4 guys stepped out. They just stood there for a few seconds, looking at each other. They weren't even talking, just looking around at each other. It was freaky. I nudged Sebastian, who realized what I was looking at. Before they could see us, we continued walking up the path so that the lot was obstructed from view. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but Sebastian didn't seem that concerned. He told me they were probably just going out to smoke. We kept walking, and by the time we got to the top, the city view was enough to take my mind off things. We always sat on this little rock wall that was supposed to keep people from wandering off the edge of the mountain. We sat there eating and talking like we used to. It was nice. Of course, that nice feeling didn't last very long. We heard the sound of talking and laughter quickly approaching us. We turned around to see 3 guys walking towards us, sharing what looked like a blunt. They were acting friendly enough, which definitely calmed my nerves a little. Instead of finding their own spot though, they walked right up to us like they wanted to start a conversation. The guy with the blunt was covered in tattoos and had a nose ring. He honestly looked pretty intimidating. He flashed half a smile before asking us if we wanted to smoke. We both said no, and one of the other guys laughed and called us pussies, to which Sebastian scoffed. My curiosity got the better of me, and I blurted out a question about what they were doing at McDonald's. The guy holding the blunt dropped his smile instantly and narrowed his eyes, like he was caught off guard by my question. His 2 friends did the same, staring at us with cold expressions. They didn't say anything for an uncomfortably long time. That's when I remembered that there had been 4 guys in that car. Not three, one of them was missing. At that point, I was fully prepared to run. I knew Sebastian was thinking the same thing. Finally, the ringleader told us that he worked nights and had just gotten off. He pulled his hoodie up to reveal a McDonald's uniform, I think, because he knew we wouldn't have believed him otherwise. He then went on to say he came to the spot every day after work to smoke with his friends. While that definitely calmed me down a bit, something about this situation was terribly off. I could tell Sebastian felt the same. We decided it was time to go. As we started walking down the path, Sebastian stopped and pointed into the trees. I followed his gaze and saw the fourth guy half hidden in the darkness. He was holding something, but I couldn't make out what it was. I felt my heart start racing. The moment he saw us looking, he started moving. That's when we ran. We bolted down the path, glancing back to see him chasing us with the three other guys close behind. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, but I didn't look back again. We finally made it to the parking lot, jumped into our cars, and floored it out of there. As I was speeding away, I could see those guys rushing to get in their car. I didn't feel comfortable driving home out of fear that I'd be leading them right to my house. I called Sebastian and told him we should meet back up on his street. We had a decent head start on them, and I don't think we were followed, but I wasn't taking any chances. When Sebastian and I met back up, we were still in shock about what the hell had just happened. I don't know if they were trying to rob us or worse. I didn't know what to think. Sebastian showed me his phone and said he had snuck a picture of them while they weren't looking. He sent it to me, but I wasn't sure what to even do with it. I had the next day off, so I convinced Sebastian to come with me back to the McDonald's so we could at least report the employee. The next day, we approached a guy on the younger side in hopes that he'd listen to us. We showed him the picture and told him what happened, and his eyes widened. He told us something literally out of a horror movie. Apparently, that guy's girlfriend had also worked at that same McDonald's and had dumped him a few months ago. He didn't take it well and would harass her while she was working and stalk her after her shifts. He obviously got fired, but that didn't help. No. The police were involved shortly after, and there was a restraining order put in place. Apparently, he had been violating that restraining order because he was camping out in the parking lot. Sebastian and I were horrified. I have no idea why he decided to follow me, but it was clear that he was unhinged. I'm praying that the police catch him camping out in the parking lot, because then he'll actually be screwed. I just hope he doesn't recognize my car anywhere. It's only been a week, but I haven't been back to that McDonald's or the Preserve since. Hopefully the police are able to do something, but that's out of my control. This is a disturbing memory from my childhood. I was about 7 or 8 years old. My mom would usually take my brother and me trick-or-treating, but this particular year after school, she dropped me off at my friend Sean's house where Sean, our friend Johnny, and I would go together. Johnny and Sean were a year older than me. We met while I was playing with my brother on the block. Johnny and Sean lived around the block from me. Sean had a weird upbringing that I never really understood. His sister was about 20 years old, so there was a big gap between them. She was always his caretaker, it seemed, whenever I was at his house. His house always smelled like cat, and his sister always had a different guy over. It seemed like his sister was always cold to me in the sense that she never acknowledged me or said hi or anything. Sean's dad was never in the picture, and his mom, I believe, was always working out of town. I guess I only met Sean's mom a few times. We never really stayed in touch long enough for me to figure all this out. Anyway, my mom dropped me off at Sean's expecting that Sean's mom would be trick-or-treating with us. After saying goodbye, I went into his house. Johnny was already there. We all had big pillow sacks to fill with candy. This was around the time I learned that neither Sean's mom nor sister were coming with us to supervise. I was young, so I felt slightly uncomfortable knowing that Johnny and Sean would be leading the way. But at the same time, I felt a sense of excitement that we'd have more freedom. I knew for a fact my mom would not have approved of us going unsupervised, though. So eventually we were off into the neighborhood, walking around, doing our rounds door to door. Quite a few people asked if we were alone or where our parents were, and Johnny would always be the one to use the same lie. that his mom was up ahead with his sister. It worked every time. This was on a Friday, so we didn't get to start trick or treating until around 5 p.m. But we didn't have school the next day, so we intended on going until our pillow sacks were completely full. We took a break after a couple of hours and went to Sean's, where he heated up a bunch of frozen pizzas. At the time, I was so jealous of the apparent freedom he had in his house, not having parents who cared about what he did. But looking back now, I count myself super blessed to have grown up in a household with 2 strict parents. After we hung out at his house for an hour, watching Halloween specials on Nickelodeon while eating pizza and candies, Johnny eventually was picked up by his mom, but Sean and I wanted to keep going. So we eventually headed back out for round 2. It was dark out now, and it had to be past 8 p.m. There were a lot fewer trick or treaters now. We tried to go to certain blocks we hadn't gone down yet, which meant straying further away from Sean's house. We found a block we hadn't touched yet and continued knocking on doors. Some houses didn't answer at this hour, and mostly everyone else had a comment about us being alone or how it was getting late. We noticed a man pushing a stroller a couple of houses down behind us. He was walking very slowly in our direction, probably a dad trick or treating for his young child. As we continued going door to door, the man with the stroller got closer. Eventually, we heard him going shay and singing softly. Eventually, he caught up to us and said, "How's the trick-or-treating going, boys?" We replied good at the same time. Then he said, "It's pretty late. I'm on my way back to my house. I can give you guys the rest of my candy." Sean and I looked at each other with telling faces, as if we just hit the jackpot. Sean asked what kind of candies, and he said a bunch of bags of different things. He said he didn't get to give much away because he wanted to take his daughter out for a trick or treat stroll. He did have a bag dangling on one of the handles of the stroller, which was filled with some candies. The stroller was fully covered by a folding piece on top, so we couldn't see his daughter. He said she was asleep, and he didn't want to wake her up, but he pointed ahead and said his house was just up this way. So we followed behind him as he pushed the stroller. He was walking a little faster now. As we walked, I realized there was next to no one else out at this point, even though it was a Friday night. It seemed like a quieter side of the neighborhood. The man talked to us as we walked, asking us questions, what part of the neighborhood we were from, where we went to school, basic stuff. I let Sean answer most of the questions, him being even just a year older than me. At that age, I felt like he was the one who should take the lead. On multiple occasions as we walked, the man would lean into the stroller and talk in a high-pitched voice to his daughter, then turn back and smile at us. We finally made it to his house. He led us up the walkway with the stroller and unlocked his door. After he opened it, he brought the stroller with his daughter inside first and then invited us to come in. Sean led the way, so I followed. He was the one to ask if we could leave the door open. The man paused, then said, "Yeah, of course." He said he'd be right back as he went to get the candy bags. He pushed the stroller into the middle of the living room, only about 10 feet away from where we were standing. I nudged Sean because I felt uncomfortable. I whispered, "Why would he leave the candy so far away?" Sean didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward the living room and then walked up to the stroller. And he lifted up the folding part that was covering the baby, and he looked disturbed. He hurried back to me, whispering, "Let's go." He was full on running once we got outside, and I followed behind, which was a bit tougher because we had those heavy pillow sacks. But I still was confused about what he saw, but just then we heard a woman's voice yell, "Excuse me." It was one of his neighbors. She came running over to us and asked if we knew that man. At this point, Sean spilled the beans and said he offered us his leftover candy, but he was pushing a stroller with a fake baby in it. I remember getting goosebumps as he said that. The woman said, "Yay, that man doesn't have a child. I saw you walking by with him." She took us to her car and drove each of us home. I know getting into a stranger's car after that was another questionable move. The woman came to my front door to talk to my mom about what we had just told her. My mom was devastated after I told her every last detail about the night. She sent me to my room while my parents called the police on that man. My parents never told me anything about what happened after that. I believe they wanted to shelter me from any more exposure to the situation. My mom didn't want me going over to Sean's house anymore, and I know she had quite a bit to say to Sean's mom. I did see Sean at school once in a while still, and we remained cordial, but our friendship was never the same after that night. It was late October, a Saturday, during Halloween weekend. I think Halloween was on a Tuesday that year, so the big party night was the Saturday before. My friends and I were still looking for last-minute plans since everything was sold out. Ideally, we wanted to find a house party. We all had pretty funny costumes too, and we wanted to get good use out of them. My friend Kate actually decided to put on her Instagram and Snapchat stories looking for parties tonight. Not something I would have ever done. I'd find that to be kind of shameless and embarrassing, but I was glad she was willing to do it. I was surprised when she texted in the group chat that someone hit her up about a party. Pretty soon after, she sent a screenshot of the details in the group chat. It had an address, start time, and a few ground rules, such as the party would only be indoors, no backyard access, and bring your own booze. It also said must bring at least one girl for every guy. The guy who sent the details to Kate was one of our guy friends around our age, who mutually knew a lot of the same people we did. Apparently, a number of people we knew were going to this party. The house address was one town over, super close. So between the four of us, we all went to Shauna's house since she had the open crib. We pre-gamed there for about an hour as we all finished up getting ready. We waited until our guy friends confirmed that they were going, then we decided to head over. We called an Uber. We all had our own drinks, varying from Four Locos to White Claws to vodka shooters. The Uber driver was probably sick of us by the end of the drive. So when we got to the house, we saw a bunch of cars everywhere. The house was pretty big with a very spacious front yard. We were four girls walking in, so surely whoever was throwing this party was going to love us. We didn't hear any music until we got closer to the door, then we heard the beating of the bass. I opened the door, and the first room we were in was a cross between the living room and the kitchen. The entire house was very dimly lit, only by a bunch of orange lights hung up, definitely creating a Halloween party ambience. The place was decently crowded, but honestly, we didn't know anyone. Kate texted the guys we knew to see if they were here yet. In the meantime, some older guy came and greeted us. He asked our names, and he said he was John, Luke's dad. Apparently, Luke was the guy throwing this party. I asked who Luke was, where he goes to school, and he replied, "Oh, he's around here somewhere. You can ask him when you see him." Then he asked us if we wanted to put our drinks in the cooler. He led us into the kitchen, where there were 3 big coolers of ice. Each one already had a bunch of drinks in it. So we put some of our cans in the coolers. The John guy seemed like he was in his 50s, which would make sense if his son was the one throwing the party. But at the same time, it seemed slightly weird he'd be so welcoming and involved in such a big party in his own house. He was going around talking to everybody, well, it seemed mostly to the girls. He seemed like he could have also been drunk. The 4 of us played beer pong at one of the tables, where some guys started talking to us, so we started playing them. Kate then said our guy friends were on the way, which I was happy to hear. John suddenly yelled my and Kate's names over by the counter in the kitchen. He was yelling shots. My other 2 friends, Shauna and Tracy, looked slightly offended, so I said, "Can we all have one?" And he yelled, "Yeah, sure." So we went over to the kitchen counter by him and all took a shot of tequila. I gagged because there was no lime. I was definitely starting to get drunk after this. It was odd how much the dad of the house was trying to hype this party up. He had this oddly welcoming yet unsettling presence, and settling part being that he was much older than the generally college-age people here, and he was pushing drinks on people. Then he asked what our poison was. I wasn't going to say anything until the girls all gave their favorite drinks. John started making a bunch of mixed drinks. In the meantime, we went back to the beer pong table, where the guys we were playing were still waiting. I plugged my phone into an outlet just because I was down to like 50%. Then I went back to the game. To mid-game, John came over with 2 drinks for Kate and me, and then he came back with 2 more for Shauna and Tracy. They were all in red Solo cups. He made me a vodka soda. I sipped on it during our beer pong game whenever I had a chance. I was drinking it slow because I was already drunk. After we lost to the random guys, I went to get my phone only to realize it didn't charge at all. It was still at the same percent. The outlet wasn't working. And I didn't feel comfortable leaving my phone on any other outlets, so I just refrained from killing the battery any further. Our guy friends eventually showed up, and it was soon after this point that things quickly became a blur. I mean very quickly, like 1 second I remember talking with our friend Jeff, the next blacked out. The next thing I remember was my friends waking me up in the car outside my house. I felt woozy, my vision was blurred, my head was spinning. We were in one of our guy friends' cars. One of the guys walked me to my front door and helped me inside, then they all left. I was alone except for my parents, asleep in their room. I felt I must have drunk way too much, but I also had a woozy, weird feeling in my head that I never felt from drinking. I felt dizzy. I went straight to my room to bed. I checked my phone, and I had some texts from a random, unsaved number. I opened it, and there were a bunch of texts already. It started with me texting my name, and then they responded, John. Oh. After that, he said, you look so cute. Based on the time he sent this, it was still during the party. There was a 2-hour gap from then until he texted me again saying, where did my favorite girls go? I was shocked at myself that I gave that man my number. I must have been drunker than I thought. But regardless, I lowered my head onto the pillow and fell asleep instantly. The next morning, I woke up to some disturbing texts. As my head was spinning, I read these sickening texts. After I fell asleep, I got a text from John that said, where are you? I'm coming to your house. You left something here, followed by I'm here. Can you come to the door? Followed by hello, are you awake? He also tried calling me 3 times. This was all at like 2 a.m. I sent the screenshot to my friends, and this was when they reminded me of what happened. John was all over me as I was increasingly becoming a zombie. My friends started getting concerned, so they pulled me away, and we left the party. And just as we were leaving, 2 police cars showed up outside, presumably for a noise complaint. And as we left, everyone took note of there being no furniture in the house. It was just a big empty space filled with people and beer pong tables. One of my guy friends looked up the number somehow, and he told me it was a voice over IP number, which I didn't understand, so he just said it was a fake phone number that John texted me from. And he also said that with my number, he could easily find my address. I felt even more sick now. I asked if anyone ever met his alleged son, and everyone said no. We were starting to think there was no son. And when Shauna suggested he might have roofied me, it made so much sense. I'd never before felt the way I was feeling. We decided to take this to the police. We all went to the nearest police station and reported everything, including the texts. The cop at the front desk asked if this was in relation to the house party in the vacant house last night. We were at first confused by him saying vacant house until he explained that there was a call from neighbors about a party going on in a house that had been vacant for some time. We all looked at each other with our mouths gaping. We were all brought into an office to sit down with, I guess, a detective to take down the whole story. He took the fake phone number and said they'll try to trace this back to somebody once they get a warrant. We gave the police everything we could, and we went on our way. I blocked the fake number. I honestly felt sick over this for a while. As the days went on and nothing happened, I was confident it was over, but none of us ever heard from the police. We never heard of any arrests being made or anything. To think that man went out of his way to advertise a house party in a vacant house to have access to young women, roofied me and possibly other girls, lied about having a son, all of this clearly a very, very dangerous man. And the fact that we still haven't been called in to identify anybody scares me to think he's still roaming free. This was a month ago. I'll update if things change, and I'm crossing my fingers that they do. I wasn't very social in college. I didn't get good grades, I wasn't in a frat. I didn't have a girlfriend, and I wasn't very involved in anything. I wasn't a very happy kid. I'm not complaining though. I found a loyal girl who would never stop fighting for me. In my late 30s, my life is good now. We live together with 2 cats named Blue and Raz, and I'm planning on proposing soon. Like I was saying though, I wasn't in a frat. so generic frat parties were kind of off the table for me. I still wanted to have fun though, I mean, who wouldn't? My friends Bryson and Ian were in the same boat. We spent most weekends killing time in Bryson's dorm. That being said, we took every chance we got when it came to parties. Most of the parties we were lucky enough to go to were off campus, meaning they weren't associated with any of the frats or the school itself. One time we actually drove over an hour just to go to a party. It's safe to say we were pretty desperate. One Friday afternoon, Ian texted the group chat, saying the girl he was talking to knew of a party not that far away. Ian tended to attract the strangest girls, I'm sure you know the ones I'm talking about. Bryson joked that he didn't want to go to some death metal, emo, any mime party, which I kind of agreed with. Ian was pretty adamant though and convinced us that this would be a normal party. It's not like we had anything better going on. Bryson convinced his brother Chris to be our designated driver. Chris didn't drink anyway and said he'd be down for a party, so everything was looking good. As we were driving to the party, Ian started complaining about the girl he was talking to. He said she hadn't answered him in hours, which honestly wasn't too surprising considering the kind of guy Ian was. He was actually pretty torn and said he was having second thoughts about even going, which seemed like an overreaction. We were already 30 minutes deep, so we weren't just going to turn around and go home. We told him to suck it up and not let it ruin the night. After a few more minutes, Ian said Callista's profile disappeared from his phone altogether. So we broke it to him that he had been blocked, and she probably decided to go to the party with someone else. He pouted for the rest of the drive. When we reached the party, we instantly knew we'd made the right choice. The house was massive, especially compared to the rest of the houses on the block. Ian didn't want to go in just yet, saying he needed a buzz to take his mind off the situation. Bryson and I didn't object to drinking, so we told Chris to park a little further down the street so we could pregame outside the car. He killed a few of the beers we had brought with us and watched as people entered the house in droves. It honestly looked like a pretty lit party. Once Ian was satisfied with his buzz, the four of us started making our way over to the house. As soon as we stepped inside, I could tell something was off. For starters, all the lights were on. There was no ambient lighting throughout the entire house, just the bright overhead lights that you'd expect to be off at a college party. Most of the people there were very nicely dressed, not what you'd expect people to wear at a rowdy party. The scene looked more like a fancy dinner party than anything else. But maybe that's what it was. After all, we didn't really have any details about what we were walking into. We didn't look too out of place, but the clothing differences were definitely noticeable. The music was also bizarre. They weren't playing trap or hip-hop or any of the usual party music. Instead, they were playing some kind of ethereal, almost druggy music. I'm not really sure what genre it was or how to describe it. But none of the songs had any words, just instruments, I guess. It wasn't bad per se, but it was odd. My friends and I looked at each other, trying to make sense of what was going on. We asked Ian for details, but he said he was just as clueless as we were. The four of us walked around a little, exploring the house. There was alcohol everywhere, so we helped ourselves. A few minutes in, I started noticing people catching my eye and then immediately looking away. It was actually so apparent that I started wondering if there was something in my teeth. I figured I was just getting looks because of what I was wearing, which did make sense to me at the time. The four of us were honestly having a good time despite the weird atmosphere. Actually, I take that back. Chris was pretty bored and said he was going to go smoke in his car. We figured it was because he didn't have a drop of alcohol in him. A few minutes after he left, a group of girls approached us. We definitely weren't super confident, so getting approached was a new thing. The three of them started flirting with us almost immediately. It wasn't even subtle. They joked about an entrance fee, which I thought was funny until I saw that they were being serious. They were holding a bottle of tequila, which we definitely weren't going to turn down. Without much thought and not wanting to appear uncool, we swigged a bottle. After that point, the six of us stuck together, drinking, talking, and occasionally dancing. It was going really well. At one point, I noticed a weird mark on Tina's neck. It was a short but solid green line that looked like it had been drawn on in Sharpie. The line was pretty thin, and I probably wouldn't have noticed it had I not been standing so close to her. I debated asking her about it but decided against it to avoid potentially offending her. It might have been a birthmark or something like that. Once I had seen it though, I couldn't unsee it, it just looked so unnatural. And green of all colors who wears green makeup? It couldn't have been a makeup smear. I decided to let it go and continued flirting with her, wondering where things would end up. Eventually, I saw Bryson and the girl he was with begin to wander off upstairs, which I was happy about. Pretty soon after, I noticed Ian and his girl also walking towards the stairs. I was nervous to ask to add anything suggestive because I didn't want to mess anything up. Despite the alcohol, I could feel myself getting really anxious and sweaty, so I told Tina I was going to the bathroom and that I'd be right back. The only bathroom I could find was occupied, so I stood outside the door and waited. Eventually, the door opened and a really tall, older-looking guy wearing a white button-down and linen pants stepped out. I rushed into the bathroom and he bumped into me. I turned around and kind of expected him to apologize, but he just stood there staring at me. It was the strangest thing. He just stood there with this blank look, sizing me up. I was about to say something when I noticed what was on his neck, the same green line I'd seen on Tina. It was literally identical. Against my better judgment, I asked him what his problem was. He smirked and shook his head before saying, "Who invited you?" Not knowing how to answer that, I blurted out, "Callista, the girl that had stood up Ian." He chuckled and looked up like he knew who I was talking about. He looked back at me, his smile completely gone now, and in a low voice, he repeated her name before gesturing around the party. "Do you see Callista here?" I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just slammed the door in his face, wondering what the hell had just happened. But I couldn't get over what he said or that green mark on his neck. Part of me regretted not asking him more questions about what the hell was going on. I left the bathroom looking for him. I walked past more people that eyed me up like I didn't belong. I didn't care, though I was going to find my friends and drag them out of here. While wandering around the party, I couldn't stop thinking about that green mark. I started looking closely at people's necks, trying to see if anyone else had a mark on their neck. To my horror, I actually saw 2 more people with the green lines on their necks. They were all the same color, same length, same thickness, same everything. It was freaky. I kept looking for that guy, all the while analyzing people's necks. For most people weren't marked up, but I kept catching glimpses of green lines on various people's necks. I was starting to freak out, so I made my way to the stairs, looking for my friends. Thankfully, as I was walking up the stairs, Bryson and Ian were walking down. I urged the 2 of them to follow me. I brought them to an empty hallway so we could talk. I briefly told them about my theory and said we had to leave immediately. They burst out laughing and told me I was just drunk. Bryson told me I was just jealous because they had hooked up and I didn't. I asked him where his girl had gone, and he told me she had instructed him to meet back upstairs in 20 minutes. Ian said his girl told him the same thing. There was no reasoning with these 2, they were riding the high of a hookup. I told them to follow me and that I'd prove that people had strange marks on their necks, but they weren't budging. Just when I was about to give up, Ian turned to the side. What I saw was actually horrifying. There was a thin line on his neck, only this one was red, not green. I practically screamed at him, which actually got them to listen to me. I then inspected Bryson's neck. There was a red mark on his too. Ian told me to relax and that it was probably just a makeup stain, but Bryson started to believe me. I told them we were leaving, and Bryson and I turned to find the door. Ian still wouldn't leave, saying he wanted to meet back up with the girl. Just then, a random guy walked past us, eyeing each of us up separately. He didn't say anything, but he paused long enough for us to notice the green line on his neck. That was it. And it was it. Bryson and I rushed for the door with Ian close behind. It felt like everyone there was staring at us as we left, but no one moved to stop us. We ran to Chris's car and told him to drive. As we were leaving, both Ian's and Bryson's phones started blowing up. Those girls were asking why we had left. How could they have even known that? They weren't even around to see us leave. My friends blocked the girls. Everyone I tell this story to has their own crazy theory about what happened that night. I really don't know what to think about it, but I don't think I want to know what might have happened had that guy not tipped me off. I've always enjoyed late night walks. There's something about the stillness that makes everything feel simpler. I'm a welder by trade, been doing it for over 40 years. Now I live alone on a big farm, just me and my dog Bosley. The house is too large for one person, but I never had the heart to downsize after my wife Maria passed away. My kids moved out years ago, and ever since cancer took her, it's just been me and Bosley. One night, after a long day in the shop, I decided to go for a walk. My property is pretty big, so just a single loop is usually enough to satisfy my craving. The air was cool, and Bosley trotted along beside me. Sometimes I think he likes me more than I like him. I've walked that loop hundreds of times, but as I was heading back toward the house, something caught my eye. I glanced up at the second-story window, the one that looks out from the bedroom Maria and I used to share. For a split second, I thought I saw something move. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring up at that window. There was no reason anyone should be in there. I hadn't been in that room in years, couldn't bring myself to. I felt my blood start to boil at the thought of some stranger breaking into my house. I wasn't going to stand for that. I rushed inside, my heart racing, and ran upstairs. The room was empty, just like I left it, no sign of anything out of place. I looked everywhere imaginable but found nothing. Yes, I was pretty freaked out, but I was more angry than anything. I didn't take this kind of thing lightly. I figured I had just seen something that wasn't there. I stood there for a while feeling foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. The next night, I woke up to Bosley growling. He's a good dog, never barks unless there's something to bark at. I sat up in my bed listening. That's when I heard creaking coming from upstairs. It could have just been the sounds of my old house, but my mind went directly to footsteps, which were coming from right above me. I'm sure you can guess which room is directly above mine. I debated grabbing my hunting rifle from downstairs, but I didn't want to go that far. If it came down to it, I was fully confident that I could take whatever was up there hand to hand. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check again, nothing. The room was exactly the same, untouched. But my anger was definitely starting to turn into anxiety at this point. Something didn't feel right in the house. The following night, I came downstairs to find the kitchen lights on. I know I turned them off before bed. I don't leave lights on, there was no question anymore someone was in my house. I started to panic. I called the police and told them I thought someone might be sneaking around. They came out, searched the house from top to bottom, but found nothing. They were nice about it, told me to call again if I needed them, but I could tell they didn't believe me. The next night was the worst by far. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go upstairs and check the bedroom again. I don't know why, maybe I thought it would settle my mind. But when I opened the door, I froze. There were clothes scattered all over the floor, Maria's clothes. I had packed them away after she died, and now they were everywhere. Something like this doesn't just happen randomly. And then I saw her. There was a woman standing in the doorway, just staring at me. And I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could tell she wasn't Maria. She was too short. I don't know who she was, but she didn't belong there. I had never been so afraid in my life. Without thinking, I ran at her. She turned and bolted down the stairs and out the front door. By the time I got outside, she was gone. So I searched the property with Bosley, but there was no trace of her. I didn't sleep that night. For months after that, I couldn't sleep. I was constantly on edge, convinced I heard footsteps upstairs at night. Every little noise set me off. I slept with my rifle next to my bed, terrified that I'd have to use it one night. I debated calling my brother to come stay with me, but I wasn't going to do that. I was raised to always handle my own problems, so that's what I did. The nightmare didn't end though. The one night I was sitting in the living room when I noticed a figure standing in the yard, looking straight at me through the window. It was her again. My heart felt like it stopped. I grabbed my hunting rifle and ran outside, Bosley close behind. She was still there, just a silhouette in the moonlight, watching me. So I fired a few warning shots into the air, hoping to scare her off. That was enough to get her to turn and run into the darkness. But that didn't make me feel any better. I was literally being tormented by some random woman who was probably homeless. I couldn't even imagine why this was happening to me. I stood there for a long time, waiting to see if she'd come back. She never did. I haven't seen her since, but I know it's only a matter of time. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but I don't think living in perpetual anxiety like this is sustainable. Thank God for Bosley. I have no idea what I'd do without him. I'll send an update if anything happens. Forgive me if I don't remember every detail of the story. It happened a while ago. I grew up in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. Not much goes on around here, so finding things to do can be a challenge. In high school, a few friends and I would sneak into and explore old abandoned buildings. That's the sort of thing we did at that age. I didn't realize how popular that kind of stuff is until many years later. Apparently, lots of people like to explore abandoned buildings. Anyway, there was this abandoned church that we'd been to a couple of times before. It was in Narberth. I actually remember the exact address, 198 Elmwood Avenue. The place was creepy, but it was kind of our go-to spot for late-night thrills. One fall evening, a few of us decided to hit the church and drink a little inside. It was a chilly night, and the air had that crisp bite to it. There were 6 of us, me, Luna, Gina, Johnny, Max, and Allie. The church sat behind an 8-foot chain link fence, which we had to climb to get in. The doors were all boarded up, so we always went through a window on the side. Once you were inside, the first thing you noticed was the floor, or the lack of one. And the entire first floor was just dirt. It looked like someone had ripped out the floorboards years ago, leaving only a hole in the center where a set of concrete stairs led down to the basement. That's where we always ended up, down in the basement. The basement had 3 rooms, but only one had a door. The other 2 just had door frames. The first room we went into was the largest. There wasn't much in it, just some old furniture, broken chairs, and a busted couch. I remember having to shush Johnny like 12 times because he was a lightweight, and the tiny bit of alcohol he had was making him really loud and antsy. Being in such a big group was always a plus, though. I felt much safer knowing we had numbers. We messed around for a while, drinking and laughing like we usually did. We might have had a speaker playing music, but I don't fully remember. Out of nowhere, a door slammed. I literally jumped, that's how loud it was. We froze, staring at each other with concerned expressions. At first, I thought one of us had closed the door by accident, but no one was near it. Almost immediately, Luna, Gina, and Johnny made a break for it, sprinting up the stairs and leaving me, Max, and Allie behind. We were the fearless ones, and none of us wanted to leave just yet. And my heart was definitely pounding, I fully admit that, but I wasn't going to let the wind freak me out. I could tell Max and Allie were thinking the same thing. I don't know if it was curiosity or stupidity, but we decided to investigate. After standing in silence for a few minutes, the 3 of us crept over to open the door that had slammed shut. Behind it was a small room, and the first thing I saw was a dresser. The mirror on top of it was cracked, and there were red stains smeared across the surface. At first I thought it was old paint or something, but when I got closer I realized something terrifying: it wasn't completely dry. The stains still had that sticky sheen to them, like whatever it was hadn't been there for long. When I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I was having second thoughts about not leaving sooner. Someone, or dare I say something, had recently been in this room. Then I saw the picture. There was an old photo on top of the dresser, a black and white shot of a woman in a wedding dress. She was smiling, but there was something off about it. The whole thing gave me a bad feeling. I backed away, but just as I turned, we heard another noise. This time it wasn't the door, it was coming from one of the other rooms. It was coming from the room we had just been in. That's when Max and Allie both decided they'd had enough. I wasn't going to argue with them. We grabbed our stuff and ran out of there as fast as we could. When we climbed back over the fence and hit the pavement, none of us said a word. After jumping the fence, I turned around, and I could swear I saw the silhouette of a person standing in the open window. I still pray that by some minuscule chance my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. My friends and I never went back there together for as long as we remained friends. I've actually been back to that church myself, although it wasn't a church anymore. By the time I got around to checking it out again, it was completely demolished. I still have no idea what we saw that night. I'm just glad my friends were there to witness it with me. Had I been alone, I might doubt this whole thing even happened. If anyone wants to do some digging, go ahead. I was never able to find out anything online, but I wouldn't be surprised if that church has a history I don't know about. I'm a graduate student studying civil engineering at Purdue University. I actually started a few months ago. I was in a good place, all things considered. Classes were going well. I made a couple of friends, and the apartment I found was decently priced. The landlord was pretty sketchy though. I had a car and lived pretty far away from campus, but I liked driving. The only downside was that it was a sketchy part of town, but I didn't care much about that. I'm a guy in my mid-20s, so I figured I could handle myself. Yeah, things were a little boring, but I was there for a degree, not a party. Everything was pretty normal until the day my backpack got stolen. I had left it on a table in a random hall to go to the bathroom, like an idiot. By the time I got back, it was gone, of course. That specific lecture hall didn't have cameras, so there was literally nothing I could do. I was more annoyed than anything. My wallet, keys, and laptop were in there. I had to cancel my cards and get new ones, report my keys missing to the landlord, and start looking for a replacement laptop. It was a whole ordeal. It sucked, but things happen. It wasn't until a few days later that I realized the situation was 1,000 times worse than I had anticipated. I drove home from campus one evening to find a handwritten note slipped under my door. I figured it was just a reminder from my landlord about something, but I was dead wrong. When I opened it up, it just said, "I see you." No name, no signature, just those 3 words. I instantly put 2 and 2 together. Whoever had stolen my backpack had gone through my laptop somehow and figured out where I lived. That was terrifying enough, but then I had a thought that was even worse. Whoever had stolen my backpack had my apartment keys. I felt my skin starting to itch. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone there. I ran into my apartment and slammed the door shut. I had a deadbolt, so even if someone did try to break in, they wouldn't be able to get past that. Over the next week, I got more notes, all handwritten. They weren't long, just weird phrases like, "I know what you did," or "watch yourself." At that point, it was really starting to freak me out. I had never done anything wrong, really, but if someone had gone through my laptop, who knows what they could have found. I really didn't know what to do. Would going to the police even help? I figured I'd wait it out a little longer, hoping whoever was messing with me would get bored. One night I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something. It was dark outside and my blinds were half closed, but I could have sworn I saw a flash, like someone took a picture of me. I quickly pulled the blinds down, but my heart was racing. There was no one there. Things didn't stop there. I started noticing small things around my apartment, things being moved. At first I thought I was just being careless. My shoes would be in a different spot, or my coat would be draped over a chair instead of hung up. It was little things that I could explain away if I really tried. But then one day I came home to find my bedsheets stripped off and my room completely turned upside down. My dresser drawers were pulled out, my books scattered across the floor. It looked like someone had torn through the place. I called the cops, of course, but they didn't do much. No forced entry, nothing stolen, so there wasn't much they could do, apparently. I asked my landlord to change the locks, but he said it would take at least 2 days to get someone out. And I begged him to make it happen sooner, but he shrugged it off, saying it wasn't an emergency. I felt betrayed. How in the world could this guy not think that this was an emergency? I kept pressuring him to do something, but he eventually stopped answering no matter what I said. That was literally yesterday. As I'm writing this, I barely slept at all last night, even though I was safe with the deadbolt in place. I'm thinking of changing the locks myself, but I'm not sure how I could even do that without causing expensive damage. I called out of all my classes this morning because I'm afraid to leave my room. I'm still here writing all this down. I'm prepared to confront whoever it is if they come back. But I'm sure if they went through my laptop, they would know my class schedule. Maybe I'll hide somewhere and get the jump on them if they try to enter while I'm supposed to be at class. I think that's what I'm going to do. I'll give an update when I can. It have been having an ongoing issue that I can't keep to myself anymore. I had just broken up with my boyfriend of 2 years. The breakup with Ben wasn't a bad one, but it wasn't great either. We'd been arguing for months, and it was obvious things weren't going to work out. So when we finally ended things, I thought it was for the best. I blocked him on everything, and that was that. I go to Temple University, and I live in a small apartment near campus. It's on the second floor of an older building, which means I can hear pretty much everything going on outside. A few days after the breakup, I started hearing strange noises at night, not like regular city sounds. These were different footsteps, quiet shuffling, like someone was just outside my window. At first, I figured it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Eventually, though, I came to terms with the fact that it was probably my ex. The reason I wasn't really freaking out was because Ben was one of the sweetest and most harmless guys there was. I mean that in a nice way, like he'd never do anything drastic or anything to hurt me. Or I figured he just missed me, so I decided to let it go. Eventually, he'd get bored. Plus, I was already stressed from the breakup, and I had this huge group project due. That project is actually a huge component of the story. I was the one responsible for editing the project and sending it to our professor. I worked on it all night, making sure everything was perfect. I emailed it just before midnight, relieved to have it done. I went to bed, trying not to think about all the other things going wrong in my life. The next day in class, we were supposed to present the video. My professor plugged in his laptop and pulled up the highlighted scenes. I was nervous, but I was also kind of proud of what we'd done. I had a lot of experience with Adobe products, and I knew our video was probably a cut above all the other groups. Then the video started playing, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't our project. Instead, there was this grainy video of someone wearing a scream mask. The person wasn't just sitting there, they were talking. They were saying horrible things about me, my professor, the government. It was disgusting. I don't even want to repeat what was said, that's how sick it was. Then my professor let the video play out a little longer than he should have, probably because he was also in shock. When he did pause it, though, his face was pale. I was frozen in place. I have never been so mortified in my life. I was literally frozen. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I could barely breathe. I felt hundreds of eyes on me. The rest of the class was staring at me. I knew what they were thinking. After the most painful seconds of my life, I snapped out of my humiliation and burst into tears before running out of the lecture hall. I felt a panic attack coming on. I debated going home, but I knew I'd definitely get expelled if I just left. Reluctantly, I waited outside the building for the class to end before approaching my professor. I basically pleaded with him that I had no idea what happened, that I was positive I had sent the right video. He decided to hear me out and confirmed that 2 videos had been sent. The first one was my project. The more recent one was the one he played in class. Clearing things up with the university took a lot of time and hassle, but I was eventually able to do it. I won't bore you with the details. Nothing was going to erase the humiliation, though. It was also clear that my email had been hacked, which was a much bigger problem. I changed my password and thought I had just gotten super unlucky. That's when things got worse. Now, 1 week later, I woke up to being logged out of Snapchat. That only happens when someone else logs in, which means I had gotten hacked there too. I don't even want to think about what they found. There was a lot of stuff on my Snapchat that I don't feel comfortable talking about.